Hi, I'm Joe Oliver. I'm a clinical psychologist and ACT therapist, and today I'm going to talk to you about this really fascinating concept within the ACT model, the self as context, or the self. It's fair to say that this is the part of the model that causes a fair degree of bafflement, bewilderment, and general gnashing of teeth, so I'm going to do my best to make it straightforward and simple. In ACT, the self is not a fixed entity, but rather a dynamic and multifaceted experience. So let's take a look at the three key elements of the self in ACT. First, we have the self as content, and this refers to all our internal experiences, including our thoughts, our beliefs, our emotions, our memories and sensations. It's all the stuff on the inside that makes up our inner world. Next, we have the self as context, and this is like the container that holds all our internal experiences. It's the space within which our thoughts and feelings and sensations arise and pass. Sometimes it's called the observing self, which is to say it's the place or perspective from which we can observe and notice our experiences. You could sort of think of this as like a room that contains all the furniture. The furniture is the content, the room is the context or the container. Or, quite literally, a container like this one here. This is a glass container and it can hold all our experiences. So, for example, it could hold our thoughts, it could hold all the beliefs that we have, it could hold our memories, it can hold all our physical sensations, and it can hold all our emotions. And the kind of thing you can notice here is the container is not made up of any of the parts of these experiences here. It's kind of different to that. It just sort of holds, contains, and places this context from which all these events can occur. Finally, we have the self as process, and this is the part of the self that observes and notices our internal experiences. It's the awareness that allows us to see our thoughts and our feelings and sensations without getting caught up in them. And at risk of beating you over the head with another metaphor, it's like a spotlight that shines on different parts of our internal world, allowing us to see them more clearly. And if you can imagine being in a darkened room and you have a spotlight lantern, you just open it up a little bit and a beam of light shoots out and you can see different things in the room. You could see perhaps a chair or a painting or a rug on the ground, and you can keep it very narrow, or you could widen that perspective out to see lots of things all at once. Your self as process is crucial for developing a healthy relationship with yourself. It allows us to see our thoughts and feelings just as kind of like passing events and not defining us and being defining features of who we are. It's worth mentioning at this point that this description of the self in these three parts is itself a metaphor, and a pragmatic one at that. The ACT model is not saying this is exactly how the self is, just that it might be helpful sometimes to view ourselves in this way. Our self-story, like the narrative that we tell ourselves about who we are, is shaped by our experiences, of course, and our interactions with the world, our history over time. And it's important to remember that this story is just that. It's a story, and it's not necessarily a fixed truth, even though sometimes we take it as that. When we get stuck in a rigid self-story, it can limit our choices and restrict our lives. So, for example, if we believe we're boring, then we might avoid social situations, even if we want to really connect with others. Intuitively, you might say, well, the answer is to say, you're not boring, you're fun, you're interesting, and you're an amazing, multifaceted human being. And although that's probably very well intentioned, let me explain a couple of reasons why that could backfire. So, just to give you an example. Just suppose I created a fan video compiling all the best bits of a random franchise. Let's just pick one, say Star Wars. And it's amazing. It's got Death Star explosions, it's got father-son bonding moments, cool weird aliens, it's all there. And you look at it and go, wow, that's cool, yeah, that is amazing. Now, suppose I did exactly the same, but this time with all the bad bits. And it is wall-to-wall CGI, Jar Jar Binks, terrible George Lucas edits, characters who die and keep coming back, and you watch it and go, wow, that is truly terrible. And then after that, you say to yourself, well, which one is true? And unlike most usual, rational, balanced Star Wars fans, both versions will be shouting from the hills to say just how true they really are. But the answer is, of course, that neither of them are true. They're just selected slices of over nearly 400 hours of the available Star Wars content. Yeah, that's right, 400 hours. That's like half a month. And the same, though, goes with our self-stories. The things that we say about ourselves, the stories we tell ourselves about who we are. They only take really thin slices of our experience and memories to create this often very compelling story about who we are. So the narrative, the story, I'm boring, just really simply can't capture the rich and vast complexity of an individual person. ACT helps us to develop a more flexible relationship with our self-story. It's through mindfulness practices that we can learn to observe our thoughts and feelings without judgment, recognizing that they are just passing events, and knowing that they are complex and nuanced. It's a little bit like a New Yorker article versus a Sun newspaper tabloid headline. By accepting our thoughts and feelings without judgment, we can create space for values-driven action. We can choose to live in alignment with what truly matters, even if it means kind of pushing up against our self-story. The self is complex, and it's an ever-evolving experience. But perhaps by understanding the three aspects of the self from this ACT perspective, it helps us to cultivate a more flexible and more compassionate relationship with ourselves, allowing us to live a more fulfilling and maybe meaningful life. So I hope that's been useful in some way and helpful. If you've got any questions or comments about this, feel free to get in contact.